Let's jump in. Today, we're gonna reverse sear tri-tip and make some jalapeno chimichurri. I mean, as I always say, more tender than your mother's love. Hey guys, I'm Matt with Meat Church. Excited to be here in the Traeger Kitchen. Today, we're gonna reverse sear tri-tip and make some jalapeno chimichurri. Let's jump in. We've got a beautiful, gigantic tri-tip here. Needs a little bit of work. It's got a lot of fat all over it. We need to peel the back, trim the excess fat off. We want to make this, it's a pretty uneven piece of meat by nature. It comes from the bottom sirloin, but we're going to trim it up to make it as even as possible. And then we're going to do a reverse sear on it. Reverse sear is great for an uneven piece of meat like this, and we'll talk more about that as we get into cooking. But let's get to work. So get your knife of choice. I'm going to start with a fillet knife. See how much of this I can peel off. Just lay your knife flat right along the meat, right underneath the fat. And you can either fillet the whole thing off, try to peel it, combination of both, whatever it takes to get the job done. Beautiful. So there you can see we're starting to expose really pretty piece of meat with nice marbling. So fat is flavor, but in moderation. You don't want any of this hard fat on here. Just picture if this were cooked and you were to slice it like this, it would be what I call a really unpleasant bite. So I'm actually going to take this entire fat cap off, and then we'll flip over to the other side. All right, doesn't have to be perfect, but anything that's really hard, you definitely want to get off of there. Now let's flip over to the other side. We're basically going to need to do the same thing. This one's probably going to be a little more difficult. I would say this steer led a nice, happy life, nice and fat. This is something that I started cooking about 10 years ago or so. It's very popular. It originated in Central California, kind of traditionally grilled over a red oak fire on a Santa Maria grill. It's kind of where its popularity came from. It's very simple, very classic, and then it kind of got a huge boost, or I don't know if you call it resurgence, or became very popular 8 to 10 years ago in the barbecue world, as people started to figure out, hey, this is a lot cheaper than buying, say, a brisket. So it is a sirloin. I think it eats more like a steak. I'm going to turn this over to the side here. There's a lot kind of hanging off here, so I'm going to kind of work this off, and then we're going to move on to cooking. All right, that looks much better. So pretty cleaned up. Let's talk about the anatomy of this roast before we cook it. It's going to be much more difficult to see after you've cooked it. But the grain in this meat runs actually 2 different directions, and you can see right along this fat line is where things change. So on this portion of the meat, the grain is running this direction, and then on the longer portion, the grain is running this direction. So why is that important? Well, when you slice the meat after it's cooked, we're going to separate these two so that we can slice against the grain. Anytime you're cooking a type of a piece of meat like this, just like fajitas, you want to cut against the grain, gives you a more tender bite in the end, and also easier to slice. So just keep that in mind, because after you season it and cook it, like I said, it's a little more difficult to see. But let's talk about seasoning. So if you know Meat Church, you know that I make craft barbecue seasonings, and one of my favorites is our Holy Gospel. This was a mix of our Holy Cow, our beef rub, which is salt, pepper, garlic, and our Gospel all-purpose, has a little sugar in it. So I describe this as a more peppery version of the Gospel. Again, it does have a touch of sugar. I used to be afraid to put sugar on beef, and then a Texan cowboy cook that's really well known told me I should not be afraid of that, and it's good. And so I got into it, and I've kind of done it ever since. It's not the only thing I season steaks or tri-tips with, but it's really good, especially if you have someone in your house that doesn't like as much pepper as our Holy Cow has. So I'm just gonna pat it on. I'm not using a binder or anything like that. You can if you like. I'm gonna season both sides, and then I'm gonna add a little additional seasoning after this. Again, uneven piece of meat, so don't be afraid to pick it up and kind of get messy with it. As we say, use the board to pick up any excess. And this is kind of seasoned to taste. Only you know how much seasoning you like, so I would call this moderate or so. Right, I'm gonna add some of my garlic and herb. So it's Italian seasoning, but just like it sounds. A lot of different garlic and a lot of different herbs. And this is a very delicate seasoning. It doesn't have a lot of salt in it, so you can put a lot of this on a piece of meat. This is a good combination. One of my favorites. I do this exact same thing with prime rib and also with a lot of steaks. There's definitely a contingent of people that think pieces of meat like this only need salt and pepper. I like to live a little. Plus, I own a seasoning company, so the different more you use, the better my kids' college education is going to be. All right, again, use the board. All right, let's talk about cooking. Let me grab a thermometer. I'm going to grab my meter probe that I'm going to insert into the thickest part of the tri-tip. All right, I've got my induction burner going over here on pretty high heat, and let me open up the Traeger. I have got some garlic that I've been smoking. We'll talk about that in just a second. I'm gonna put this tri-tip on. I've got one that's already been cooking. So we're cooking at 225 degrees. I like hickory pellets. There's a lot of different options when it comes to cooking this, but when you're doing a reverse sear, I like to go low with a lot of smoke. So 225 degrees with super smoke. Again, I'm using hickory pellets, but a lot of other good choices you could use. But when it comes to beef, I want a heavy smoke wood. So I would prefer hickory, mesquite, something along those lines. So that's what we went with today. As you can see, you've got the meter probe in here. This tri-tip got to 120 degrees. Reverse searing is a two-step process. I'm gonna smoke it to 115, 120, whatever your preference is. Pull it out. We're gonna let it rest for a second while our induction heats up. I'm gonna put a little bit of oil on it, and I'm gonna sear 1 to 2 minutes per side. So for me, I love medium rare, which is 130 to 135 degrees. So in the first step, I said I took this to 120. That's a personal preference thing on your side. If I'm cooking this for my wife, she likes hers medium. So I would have smoked this to closer to 130 and then seared it at the end. So we've got our induction on. It's on pretty high setting. So you can see it starting to smoke. So it's pretty hot. So let's put some oil on it and sear. Got a little bit of avocado oil. I like an oil with a high smoke point. And I can take the meter out at this point. Just from experience, I know that, like I said, we can go 1 to 2 minutes aside. Right here on the cast iron. Woo. She's hot. I hope y'all got that reaction, because that was a good one. That was not faked, my friends. All right. Somebody got to set a timer. Let's go. I think we're gonna go closer to 2. So I like a really hard sear in cast iron. My favorite way to eat steak or tri-tip, because I want that crust. I want kind of maximum crust across there. Some people try to sear on grill grates. I prefer it personally on cast iron. All right. All right, it's been about 2 minutes. Let's see if we can flip it. There we go. Look at that. That's what we're looking for. There's a fine line between something being between char and something being burned. There's lots of flavor in that. All right. All right. It's been a couple minutes on that side. There we go. All right. So we're going to set this aside. When you're grilling a steak or tri-tip. You've got, with that high heat, you've got all the moisture and the muscle fibers out at the end of those strands. And so you want to let it sit and relax. So all that, basically, I'll call it moisture, redistributes throughout this. So we're gonna set it aside, be a perfect time for us to make our chimichurri. All right, I love chimichurri with beef. The acidity in it, just take the rich beefy flavor, amazing. And there's so many ways that you can do this. I'd love to say there's no right or wrong way. That's not exactly true. But we're gonna be putting some cilantro, parsley, oregano, jalapeno, shallots, little lime juice. And what we're starting out with is really kind of a big star of the show here. What we did was we took raw garlic and put it in the bottom of this pot, and then just kind of lightly or just slightly covered it with olive oil, threw it in the Traeger for a couple hours until you get this beautiful roasted garlic here, just like this. So I'm just gonna start out with about 6 of these or so, maybe a little more because I love garlic. All right, we're gonna dice this up and then bring in all our other ingredients. All right, we're going jalapeno chimichurri. So this is optional. I'll teach you a little something about jalapenos, depending on how hot you want it. I love the flavor of jalapeno, but I don't like things that are super hot. The heat in a jalapeno or in peppers, the capsaicin comes from the veins that are inside of it. Little trick here, I'll use this spoon to kind of pull some of that out. This is up to you. If you want it really spicy, leave it all in there. So I'll just kind of take some of it out. So it's kind of just like you would do a jalapeno popper. So those veins, a lot of people think all the heat comes from the seeds. There's actually more in those veins. Where did I learn that? Teaching a barbecue class in Sweden, of all places. If you like kind of southwestern flavors, but you don't want a jalapeno, you could go with a poblano, which has less heat in it. All right, let's get into, we got a shallot here we got to do. Shallot's pretty key to me. It's much more mild than an onion, so it has a nice flavor. I use lots of this in my cooking. Works great in chimichurri. All right, let's get into the herbs. So I like mine to be cilantro heavy. Call it a Texas thing. I remove most of the stems, fold it up, and then just slice away. Feeling like I need to go with a little bigger bowl. Because everything's bigger in Texas. All right. All right, a little bit of parsley. I usually go about half the amount of parsley. Definitely need at least the juice of 1 lemon. Without the seeds. I'm just gonna kind of mix these up here, and then we're gonna do some olive oil and some red wine vinegar, a little bit of seasoning. So I do a little more oil than I do Vinegar, that's a preference thing. I've got friends that like a lot more red wine vinegar. So what I like to do is just kind of get it in here, work it around, make sure it's wet enough, which it's not yet, and just keep adding until it's where I want it. Forgot the oregano. So just pick these off the stems. I've left this very rough chop, so you could chop this up or not, depending on your preference. Give it a little chop. All right, last touch, I'm gonna go a little Meat Church seasoned salt. All right, give it a little sample. It's good, very bright. Probably the roughest chopped chimichurri I've ever made in my life, but hey, it'll work. All right, let me clean off my board here. All right, let's bring our tri-tip back in here. And you actually can see the grain pretty decently through here up until where it changes direction. So what I'm gonna do, like I said in the beginning, is I'm going to slice right where they come together. I'm gonna see how we did, which is really good for me. I personally like no more than medium rare. I actually like my meat slightly under medium rare. So this is good for my preference. And then, as I was saying earlier, slice against the grain on a tri-tip. So it's gonna be a little weird at first because your slices are gonna be pretty small and they're gonna get bigger as you go on. When it comes to tri-tip, I actually like to cut pretty thin slices. Don't want them to be too thick, and that will also help with the chew. So against the grain, thin slices is pretty big key for me. If you weren't doing chimichurri, a good option on this would be to finish this in a nice butter. So as it's resting, have a good compound butter or plain butter if you don't have it. Just a really good quality butter. There we go. This is a nice, pretty slice just right out of the middle. And the benefit of Reverse Sear, why I love this, talked about it being an uneven piece of meat. Well, you can see that what I'll call the doneness from coast to coast is medium rare. So you don't have, that sear was 2 minutes per side, but on the outside here, you would normally see, if we seared even longer, it would start to kind of gray around there. But honestly, this is what I'd consider perfect medium rare, from coast to coast, crust to crust, however you want to say it. And when you look here, really nice crust on the outside from that sear. So I'm gonna try it first without the chimichurri, and I'm gonna try it with it. I mean, as I always say, more tender than your mother's love. Such good flavor. That was so simple with 2 seasonings, just a great cut of meat. With a subtle smoke from being in the Traeger for, probably 45 minutes in the first step before we went to sear it. Really, really nice. All right, a couple more slices here. Let's get a little bit of that chimichurri. Look at that, beautiful, vibrant, and delicious. I went a little coarse with the chimichurri, but my mom would be proud. She'd be like, hey, you have your salad or your vegetables with it. That's my favorite, to have tri-tip with chimichurri, like I said earlier, with the acidity there, it just pairs good with a big meat like this, so I'm a huge fan. We'll put the recipe below down in the description. It's also on Traeger.com. We're gonna have cooking videos each and every week. So make sure that you like and subscribe, and we'll see you guys next week.